The week I turned 28, I got a phone call that made my sister drive 4 hours to show up uninvited at my apartment door. She didn't knock. She just stood in the hallway and stared at me like I had stolen something from her. And I suppose, in her mind, I had. But I need to back up. Because none of it makes sense without the part that came before the part I spent most of my life pretending didn't hurt as much as it did. My parents sent out a family newsletter every single year. Not just a Christmas card, a full newsletter. 4 pages, sometimes 6. My mother designed it herself on her laptop every November, printed it on cream cardstock, and mailed it to what she called our people, extended family, old neighbors, church friends, my father's colleagues, people from their bowling league. Anyone who had ever mattered to them in any capacity got one of those newsletters. I know this because I used to help stuff the envelopes when I was small. I would lick the stamps while my mother organized the stack by zip code. I thought it was the most important task in the world. The newsletter always had photos, a big one on the front, and smaller ones scattered throughout. My sister, Megan, was in every single one. Her school play, her soccer trophy, her first car, her prom dress, her college acceptance letter held up to the camera with both hands, grinning like she'd just won something enormous, which I suppose she had. I was in the newsletter exactly twice. Once, when I was 4, in a group photo at my grandmother's house that my mother clearly couldn't crop me out of without it looking obvious. And once in the background of a shot of our backyard, partially hidden behind a lawn chair, so blurry you'd have to know to look for me. I noticed when I was around 9. I didn't say anything for years because I kept telling myself I was wrong. I was misremembering. My mother loved me. Parents don't do that. But when I was 14, I finally asked. We were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother was already laying out photos for that year's newsletter, arranging them in little clusters. I looked at the spread and I didn't see myself anywhere in it. Not once. And I heard myself say, very quietly, "Mom, am I going to be in the newsletter this year?" She didn't look up. She just moved a photo of Megan at her dance recital, slightly to the left, and said, "Your sister photographs better with us, sweetheart. The coloring works." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, really. My sister and I have similar coloring. We look like sisters. But my mother said it so casually, the way you'd say it might rain later. Like it was just a fact about the world and not a decision she was making over and over, year after year. I went upstairs and I sat on my bed for a long time. I want to be honest about something. I am not a perfect narrator of my own childhood. I know that memory is imperfect. I know that I probably filled in some gaps with hurt feelings and old resentments, but I also know what I saw. I know what it felt like to help stuff those envelopes and know that none of the faces inside belonged to me. I moved out at 22 for a job in Austin. My parents are in Ohio. The distance made things easier in some ways and harder in others. Easier because I didn't have to watch Megan open Christmas morning gifts while my pile was noticeably smaller. Harder because the loneliness of it had more room to breathe when there was no distraction. My grandmother, my mother's mother, lived in Cincinnati. She was 79 when I moved. Sharp and funny and the kind of woman who sent birthday cards with actual handwritten notes inside, not just a signature. She and I had always been close when I was small. She used to let me sit next to her while she did her crossword puzzles. She called me her quiet one, not as a criticism but as an observation, the way you'd say someone had blue eyes. After I moved, I called her a few times. The first 2 times, she answered, and we talked for maybe 20 minutes each. She asked about Austin. She told me she'd seen photos of the city and it looked very flat. I laughed. She laughed. It felt normal. The 3rd time I called, my mother answered instead. I didn't know my mother was there. I said, "Oh, is Grandma around?" And my mother said, "She's resting, honey. I'll tell her you called." I said okay, and hung up, and waited for my grandmother to call me back. She didn't. I called again 2 weeks later. My mother answered again. Then, the following month, I called and the line rang and rang with no answer. I tried a few more times over the next several weeks. Nothing. I sent a card for my grandmother's 80th birthday. I picked it out carefully, cream envelope, flowers on the front, the kind she would like. I wrote 2 paragraphs inside about how much I missed talking to her, and how I hoped she was well. I mailed it to her address in Cincinnati. She never mentioned it when we talked. Except we stopped talking, because she stopped picking up. And the few times she did, the conversation was short and a little distant, like she was being careful about something, like she was choosing words. My mother told me, about a year after I moved, that my grandmother had started having some memory issues. Nothing serious, she said, just normal aging. She gets confused sometimes, forgets things. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. I believed her. I don't know why I believed her so completely, except that it gave me a reason for the distance that didn't hurt quite as much as the alternative. My grandmother wasn't pulling away from me. She was just confused. She was just aging. It happened to everyone eventually. So I stopped calling as often. I told myself I didn't want to confuse her. I told myself that my mother was there, in Ohio, looking after things, and that was better than me calling from Texas to cause disruption. I told myself a lot of things that kept me from getting on a plane and showing up at my grandmother's door. That is something I have to live with. I want to say clearly because I know how this part sounds that I did try. I tried more than the story makes it seem, and I stopped, not because I didn't care, but because I was being fed a reason to stop, and I was too far away and too worn down to push through it. I should have pushed through it. I know that now with the particular sharpness of a lesson learned too late. My Aunt Carol is my mother's younger sister. She lives in Dayton. She and I were never especially close when I was growing up because she was sort of on the periphery of my mother's orbit, someone who came to Thanksgiving and sent generous gift cards but didn't appear in any of our major family moments. I think, looking back, that my mother kept everyone slightly at arm's length except the people she wanted to perform for. Carol called me on a Thursday evening in March. I remember it was Thursday because I had just gotten home from a work happy hour I hadn't wanted to attend and was still in my coat when my phone rang. She said, "I don't know if anyone has told you, but your grandmother has been moved to a care facility." I sat down on my couch without taking my coat off. "What kind of facility?" Carol was quiet for a second. Then she said, "The kind you don't come home from." She told me the memory issues had progressed significantly over the past 18 months. That my grandmother was in a good place, comfortable, well cared for. That my mother and Megan visited regularly. That the facility was in a suburb north of Cincinnati, about 40 minutes from my parents' house. And then Carol said something that changed the shape of everything. She said, "I went to visit her last week, and she asked me if I had heard from you. She asked if you were all right. She said she'd been writing to you and hadn't heard back." I felt very still. The kind of still that happens when your brain is running too fast for your body to keep up. "Writing to me," I said. "Letters," Carol said. She said she'd been writing you letters for years. Birthday letters, mostly. Sometimes just to check in. She was hurt that you never replied. She thought you'd decided to cut her off. That you were ashamed of her maybe. Embarrassed by the memory things. I want to describe what that felt like, but I find I don't have the right words for it. It was something that started in my chest and moved outward. A slow unwinding of something that had been wound very tight for a very long time. "I never got any letters," I said. Carol didn't say anything. "I never got any letters," I said again, as if saying it twice would help it make sense. "I know," Carol said quietly. "Where were they being sent? What address?" Another pause. Then, "Your parents' address. I think when you moved, I don't think your grandmother had your Austin address. I think she just kept sending them to Ohio." I stood up. I was still in my coat. I walked to my kitchen and stood there, not knowing why I'd walked there. "Carol," I said, "did my mother intercept those letters?" Carol said, "I think you should come home." I booked a flight for that Saturday. I didn't call my parents. I called Carol back and asked her for the name and address of my grandmother's care facility, and she gave it to me without hesitation. I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt and put it in my wallet immediately so I wouldn't lose it. I want to be clear that I did not wait. I did not deliberate. Every criticism I had quietly absorbed over the years about being passive, about not advocating for myself, about letting things happen to me instead of happening to things. I heard all of it in Carol's voice, and I bought a plane ticket for 36 hours later, and I went. My grandmother was sitting in a chair by the window when I walked in. She was smaller than I remembered. Her hair was white now, fully, where it used to be a soft gray at the temples. She was looking out the window at a courtyard with a small fountain in it. I stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard me. When she turned and saw me, she went very still for a moment, and then her face did something I will never forget for as long as I live. It crumpled and opened at the same time, the way a face does when something it had stopped hoping for has suddenly appeared. "There you are," she said. I crossed the room and sat in the chair next to hers and held her hand and let her call me by my name, which she remembered. She remembered me completely, and we both cried for a while before either of us said anything useful. She thought I hadn't written back to her letters. She thought I had pulled away because of the memory issues. She had enough clarity, in that moment, to know that her memory was not what it was, and it had clearly been a source of deep shame for her. She thought the granddaughter who used to sit beside her doing crossword puzzles had decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore. I told her that I never received a single letter. I told her that I called, and her phone rang without answer, or my mother picked up. I told her about the birthday card I'd mailed to her old Cincinnati address, the one with 2 paragraphs I'd written about missing her. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I never got a card." We sat together for almost 3 hours. I told her about Austin. She told me the fountain in the courtyard had a frog ornament that she had named Gerald. She told me that Megan came to visit sometimes and talked mostly about herself. She said it without malice, just as an observation, the way she always made observations. Before I left, she squeezed my hand and said, "I want you to talk to Mr. Bellamy." I asked who Mr. Bellamy was. "My attorney," she said. "He has been very patient. I've been changing things, and I needed to be sure you were still. I needed to know you hadn't forgotten me. I need to talk to him now that I've seen you." I didn't know what to say to that. I told her I would never forget her. She nodded like that was settled, and she turned back to the window and Gerald the frog. I went to my parents' house that afternoon. This was not an impulsive decision. I had spent the plane ride and the rental car drive thinking about what I wanted to say, and I had decided I would be calm, and I would ask direct questions, and I would not let anyone redirect me into talking about something else. My mother answered the door. Her expression moved through surprise, and then something I can only describe as a rapid recalculation, like a computer running through scenarios too fast for the human face to hide it. "What are you doing here?" she said, not warmly. "I just came from visiting Grandma," I said. "I'd like to come in." She let me in. My father was in the living room. Megan wasn't there, which I was grateful for. I sat down across from my parents and I asked them, plainly, whether they had been intercepting letters from my grandmother to me. My father looked at the floor. That told me everything. My mother said, "That's a very dramatic way to characterize it." I asked her to characterize it another way. She talked for a while. She talked about how my grandmother had not been well, and how the letters had been confused, and how she hadn't thought it was helpful to pass along communications that might upset me, and how she had been managing a very difficult situation, and I had no idea how much she had been handling. She said this with real conviction, the way she said most things, and I recognized for the first time with complete clarity that my mother was a woman who believed her own justifications. She was not lying, exactly. She had simply constructed a version of events in which she was always the reasonable one, and she had lived inside it for so long it had become true to her. I said, "She thought I abandoned her." My mother said, "She's not well." "She remembered me perfectly," I said. "She knew my name. She knew every conversation we'd ever had. She named the frog in the courtyard fountain. She is not as diminished as you have been telling me she is." My father kept looking at the floor. My mother shifted and said something about how I didn't understand the full picture. I told her I understood enough. I told her I knew about the letters. I told her I knew about the phone calls. I told her that I had gotten on a plane without telling them because I finally understood that if I waited for permission or explanation from them, I would wait forever. I left after about 40 minutes. There was nothing more useful that could happen in that room. My mother was not going to admit to anything that required her to be the villain of a story. My father was not going to contradict her. That dynamic was older than I was, and I did not have the tools to dismantle it in a Sunday afternoon. I drove back to Carol's house and stayed the night there. Carol had a box. She brought it out after dinner, set it on the kitchen table between us. It was a shoebox, plain brown, the kind you get at a department store. She said she had found it in my grandmother's old house when they were clearing things out to move her to the facility. She said she had opened it and understood immediately what it was, and she had kept it because she hadn't known what to do with it, and she had been waiting for a moment like this one. Inside were 14 letters. Each one was in its original envelope, addressed in my grandmother's handwriting to my parents' home address. Each one had been opened and refolded. Some of them had small notes in the margins, my mother's handwriting, as if she had been editing them, deciding what they were allowed to say. None of them had ever reached me. The oldest one was dated 9 years ago. My grandmother's handwriting was firm and clear in that one. She wrote about how she had been thinking of me and hoping I was settling into adult life well. She asked how Austin was treating me. She said she had been making my grandfather's spaghetti recipe, and it didn't taste right without someone to share it with. I sat at Carol's kitchen table, and I read all 14 letters in order. By the time I got to the more recent ones, where my grandmother's handwriting had grown shakier and the sentences sometimes circled back on themselves, I had gone through most of a box of tissues that Carol quietly placed next to me without comment. The last letter was dated 14 months ago. In it, my grandmother wrote that she understood I had my own life, and that things had been difficult and she didn't want to pressure me. She wrote that she still thought about our crossword puzzle afternoons. She wrote that she had started talking to a young man named Gerald, and then, in parentheses, she had written the frog, but he's a very good listener. And I laughed out loud at that, through everything else I was feeling. 2 weeks after I flew back to Austin, I received a phone call from a Mr. Elliot Bellamy, attorney at law, calling from a firm in Cincinnati, Ohio. He told me he was calling on behalf of my grandmother. He said she had asked him to reach out to me. He said she had been in the process of amending her estate documents for some time, and had wanted to wait until she had personally confirmed my circumstances before making certain changes final. He was professional and precise. He told me that my grandmother had been leaving the bulk of her estate in one direction for several years, based on information she had been receiving about the family situation. He said she had informed him, after my visit, that the information had been incomplete and that she wished to revise accordingly. He said he was not at liberty to give me full details over the phone, but he wanted me to know the call was coming and to expect correspondence. I didn't know how to respond to that. I thanked him, and I asked if he would pass along to my grandmother that I was glad I had come to see her and that I planned to come back as often as she would have me. He said he would pass that along. My sister called me 2 days after that, not in the evening, not at a reasonable hour, at 11:40 at night, which in Texas means even later in Ohio, and my phone buzzed me awake from a dead sleep. I looked at the screen and saw Megan's name, and something already tightening in my chest told me I knew what this was about. I answered. She was not calm. She asked me what I had said to Grandma's lawyer. She asked me what I had told him. She said that I had gone behind everyone's back and that I had no right to just show up and manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman, and that I needed to call Mr. Bellamy first thing in the morning and tell him that I had been mistaken about whatever I had said to him. I waited until she was finished. Then I said, very quietly, I didn't say anything to him. He called me. Silence. He called me, I said again. I didn't contact him. I didn't ask for anything. I went to see my grandmother. That's all I did. I sat with her for 3 hours and told her I missed her. Megan said I was being naive if I thought that wasn't calculated. I said, I think you're scared. She hung up. I lay there in the dark for a while after that. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it would be easy to say I felt triumphant, and that would make a cleaner story. But what I actually felt was something sadder and more complicated. I felt like I was looking at a long hallway I had been walking through my whole life, and finally understanding that all the doors on my side had always been locked, and the doors on Megan's side had always been open, and neither of us had chosen that, but only one of us had ever questioned it. I don't know that my sister is a bad person. I think she is a person who benefited from a system that was designed to benefit her, and she mistook that benefit for merit. I think she genuinely believed she was more loved because she was more lovable, And I think she is going to spend a long time sitting with the evidence that it was never about that at all. I think that will be its own kind of loss for her, even if she never admits it. My grandmother passed away 11 weeks after I visited her. It was peaceful, Carol told me. She had been comfortable. In the last days, she had been talking about my grandfather, who had been gone for 20 years, as if he were nearby. She had called me by name 2 days before she died, unprompted. She told the nurse I was her quiet one, and that quiet didn't mean absent. I flew back for the service. I stood in the same space as my parents and my sister for the first time since that Sunday afternoon conversation, and we were all careful with each other in the exhausted way that grief enforces, regardless of what else is happening. My mother cried. My father held her arm. Megan stood slightly apart. I stood with Carol. Mr. Bellamy's office sent formal correspondence about 6 weeks after the service. I am not going to describe the specifics, partly because they are private, and partly because the specific numbers are not the point. The point is that my grandmother had known exactly what she was doing, and she had done it clearly and legally and with full documentation, and she had done it after seeing me, after holding my hand, after understanding what had been kept from her and what had been kept from me. She had revised things substantially. Not to punish anyone, I think. She wasn't that kind of woman. But to correct a record, to account for what was real instead of what she had been told. Megan called me again when she received her own correspondence. This time it was afternoon. This time she did not yell. She just said, in a flat voice, "I hope you're happy." I thought about that for a moment. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting in those letters. I thought about Gerald the frog. I thought about what it means to be called someone's quiet one and have it mean something good. "I'm not happy," I said honestly. "She's gone. There isn't anything happy about any of this. But I'm glad she knew the truth before she died. I'm glad I got 3 hours with her. I would trade everything else to have had more." Megan didn't respond to that. She said she needed time and she would be in touch. I told her I would be here. I don't know what happens next with my family. I am not optimistic in the way I perhaps should be, because I have learned enough now to understand that people who have arranged their lives around a convenient story do not abandon it easily, even when the story has been disproven. My mother will find a way to reframe what happened. My father will go along with it. Megan may or may not find her way to something more honest. I can't control any of that. I have stopped trying to. What I can control is this. I have the letters now. Carol gave me the shoebox and I wrapped it in a scarf and put it in my carry-on and flew it home to Austin. The letters sit in the top drawer of my desk. Sometimes I take them out and read one. Sometimes just the last one, with the parenthetical about Gerald. I am my grandmother's quiet one. And quiet doesn't mean absent. It means that I was here, and I was paying attention, and I am still here, and I am still paying attention. And some things that were buried for a long time have finally been returned to where they belong. If you are someone who has a person in your life you have been meaning to reach, I want to say this as plainly as I know how. The reasons you have been given for why you cannot may not be the real reasons. The distance may not be as true as it has been made to feel. There may be a shoebox somewhere with your name on it. Go. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the right moment, or the explained circumstance, or the assurance that you won't be turned away. Get in the car or book the flight or pick up the phone and be the person who showed up. I wish I had been her sooner. I'm grateful, every single day, that I got to be her at all.